Penny, I'm home.
I know, Father.
Hello, everyone. This is Ray Green introducing another program in the series of Famous Fathers. You've just heard the voice of Howard Lindsay, star and co-author of that great comedy hit Life with Father, greeting Vinny with his usual homecoming. Of course, Mr. Lindsay's not back with us yet due to ill health, but we do have our famous guest father with us today, as well as a famous guest mother. Our guest father is truly a famous American father and the son of one of the most famous of all American fathers, the late President of the United States, Theodore Roosevelt. And that, of course, means that today we're honored in having with us as our guest father, Colonel Theodore Roosevelt. He was received many citations from foreign governments for his service overseas in the last World War, as well as the Distinguished Service Cross from this country. He was right in the midst of the most important battles of that war, was Assistant Secretary of the Navy upon his return, Governor of Puerto Rico, the Governor General of the Philippine Islands, has made several expeditions to Asia. He was one of the original organizers of the American Legion, has received the Order of the Jade, which has been awarded to only a few people throughout the world for distinguished service to China. He's the Vice President of the Boy Scouts of America, has written many books, and since 1935 he has been and still is editor and Vice President of the Doubleday Duran Publishing Company. He's the father of 4 children, 2 daughters and 2 sons. But I could go on for hours and tell you about Colonel Theodore Roosevelt, but you're probably just as familiar with this outstanding American as I am. Our famous mother is the wife of the famous author, John Phillips Marquand, who in 1938 was awarded the Pulitzer Prize for his best-selling book, The Late George Appley. Mr. Marquand also saw service in the last World War, and in 1916 he served on the Mexican border with the Massachusetts National Guard during the Pancho Villa fracas. Our 2 distinguished guests are going to have somewhat of a debate on the subject, father's position in the household. We'll probably have lots of fun, but first, a word of interest to all. Well, we're gathered around a table here in the studio, Colonel Theodore Roosevelt, Mrs. John Phillips Marquand, and myself. We're going to start this discussion off, and I think the Colonel might open the idea up.
I'd be delighted to open the idea up. First, I want to thank you for the introduction and say you were wrong on one point. You were wrong on the fact that I have 2 daughters and 2 sons. I've got 3 sons and 1 daughter, and my wife wouldn't thank you to cut off one of our sons.
My most humble apologies.
Another thing. You didn't name my principal claim to distinction because in addition to those, I've got 2 grandchildren. Look, Adelaide, you've seen Life with Father.
Yes.
What do you think of Father's position in that household?
Well, I think Father's position in that household was just about what it should be.
Oh, come.
Yes,
Now,
I
come.
really do.
You do?
Yes.
Well, now, my feeling about a father's position is this, that a father's position in the household is secondary to the mother's. The mother's got the responsibility for bringing up those children, and she calls in the father as an aid and advisor.
Well, I know in my household I should have the responsibility for running the dull little routine of the house. And when you speak of bringing up children, of course, I have 1 small child, a year old, which makes me very capable authority on education of children from 1 to 21.
Adelaide, that makes me think of something that Mother always used to say. Mother said she wanted to have 12 children. She said that 1 child took all your time and 12 couldn't do more. So there you are, do you see, right on that.
I agree with her, and I think it's perfectly deplorable the way the families in the United States have fewer and fewer children now, particularly the educated people who could give something to their children, and it's always a discreet tool.
Adelaide, you know Eleanor, my wife. Do you think that I'm head of that household? Honestly now.
Well, I know that in your household there's a great deal of talk of humility on your part and a great humble act. But when you really look down underneath, I have a very definite idea as to who runs the works.
Now, that makes me think that you were siding with my wife because she always pulls that particular kind of camouflage over some arbitrary act of hers. Adelaide, there's one story that's always amused me. It was something that happened to my father. Happened to us and to my father when we were all little. You know, we used to go off on picnics because, of course, your father used to go with us on some of these picnics. This time we were going out to Lloyd's Neck, which is near Oyster Bay, and we all went out in rowboats. It was a very hot day. And Father took all of us children out walking, and we ranged from about 15 to about 6 in age, and there were about anywhere from 10 to 20 of us. And we got hotter and hotter, and the water looked beautiful, but we brought no bathing suits. Father finally cut the Gordian knot by saying, "Go in with your clothes on." We went in with our clothes on. And we had a grand time, and we started back to where the assembled mothers were. And I can remember, as if it were today, as we approached them, and they heard us coming, one of them looked up, then another, and then the look of horror and surprise that came over their faces when they realized that we'd been in bathing with our clothes on. We weren't in disgrace. Father was. The head of the family. It'll amuse you too, Mr. Green, because coming back from that, we rode back in a boat, and I was in the boat with Father and my brother Kermit. Kermit had croup, or was usually having croup in the evening, and I can hear my mother talking to Kermit. "Now, Kermit, put this coat and wrap it around you. After what your father has done, taking you in bathing with your clothes on, I'm afraid you're going to have croup tonight." And then we all walked up to our house, Sagamore Hill. And Mother walked ahead, and Father came after her, and we all trooped along after him. And when we got to the house, Mother said, as she went in the door to the children, "Come, children, now. I'm going to give you medicine to see that you don't get a cold." And we hung back, and the door closed. And Father was standing behind, and he'd been saying very, very little for a long while. And we turned to Father, and we said, "Father, won't you please stop Mother giving us medicine?" And I can see Father as he turned around to us and said, "Children, I shan't attempt to stop your mother. I'll be very fortunate if she doesn't give me medicine, too." Now, that was his position in the family, Adelaide.
Well, I can almost match you with a swimming with clothes on story that really ties up to my father, too. My father always had an idea that all of his daughters should earn their living, no matter what. We must be able to earn our living whether we had to or not.
A darn good idea.
And he decided that we should all go to college. And when we went out into the world, at first we were never given too much money. We had to rustle a bit for ourselves. And the first time I ever crossed the continent, I got to Glacier Park. And I had driven out there in a Ford with another girl. And when we got there, the one thing we wanted to do was to take one of these very nice, expensive horseback trips. But we didn't have enough money. It came to $10 or $12 a day with your guide and horse, and we hung around the hotel hoping that some break would come, and all of a sudden a movie company turned up, which was taking movies for the Great Northern Railroad. They said that we could go along if we would pose in the movies.
Yeah.
And we could get a free horse and a free camping trip. So we thought this was wonderful, and it was just smooth. All we had to do was to take the trips that we'd be taking anyway. But the rub came when way up in Brown's Pass, there was a glacier running down into a pool and an iceberg in the middle of it. And I had to swim out to the iceberg with my clothes on and climb up. And I felt that day I had well earned my $12 trip.
I think that's delightful. Adelaide, you know, that brings up a point that I think is quite important in the question of children. I think that they are very apt in this modern overdone cult to emphasize the importance of the children over the importance of the parents, to soften the children up, make them conceited and self-centered. How about it? Agree with me?
I certainly do agree with you, and I think from all the conversation I've heard about some of the ultramodern schools that they're all built around the child. The home must be built around the child, and every bit of atmosphere that comes into the home is just calculated to be just the right thing for a child, and that to me gives the child a very poor basis to start life on. He doesn't have the shocks. He's protected, and
well, I agree with you, and I think there's another awful thing that's done then. the child gradually begins to think of herself or himself as the center of the universe to which everybody should bow down, and doesn't realize that they've got to have thought for the feelings of others and look out for themselves. Now, Adelaide, you said about your father making you all feel that you had to support yourselves, that you had to pull your own weight in the boat. Father always made us think that. We've always made our children think that. Matter of fact, you know, Father used to say to us, "Children, I'll give you the best education I can afford. And when you're through your education, it's root, hog, or die." And that's a pretty good idea, don't you think so?
I think it's a very good idea.
Just before we started here, Colonel, you had made some comparison to a bird down in Australia, I believe it was, and compared him to a father. I'd like you to make that comparison once again.
That goes back to our original point, father's position in the household. There's a bird down in Australia called the bowerbird. And the male of the bowerbird makes the nest and does everything of that sort and finally sits on the eggs. Now, I don't think a father should be a bowerbird. I think a father should go out, rustle, provide the means of maintaining the household, protect the household, but realize that within the household and making the household, the mother is supreme.
Yes, that's true.
Do you agree with that, Mrs. Marquand?
I certainly do.
Well, we're running a little bit short of time here, and I'm sure both of you must have some last word to our audience.
Well, I've got a last word right now, and I want to go back again to what we were talking about just before. I think all fathers and mothers should bear in mind two thoughts in bringing up their children. The first is to bring those children up so they're not selfish. And the second is to make them realize that in this world, every tub must stand on its own bottom, and that those children must go out and face the world on their own responsibility. Those are the two important things I think parents should bear in mind.
Well, my last word is just to say that I think your last word is just as it should be, which is what a mother should say, isn't it?
No! That's a horrid thing to say to me.
This seems to be the one time where the gentleman instead of the lady has had the last word. And thanks very, very much to you, Colonel Theodore Roosevelt, and to you, Mrs. John Phillips Marquand, for coming in with us. And now, before we say good night or good afternoon, a word of interest to all. And so we come to the close and another in the series of programs, Famous Fathers. Remember that next week we'll be back again at this same time with another famous guest father and also a famous guest conductor to fill Howard Lindsay's place during his absence. And now, on behalf of Colonel Theodore Roosevelt and Mrs. John Phillips Marquand, this is Ray Green, hoping that you'll make your life with father and mother a very, very happy one.